What's up YouTube, this is Tubedigga. This video is a complete beginner's guide to beat making on the MPC Live and MPC X. This video goes alongside my other complete beginner's guides such as Complete Beginner's Guide to Drum Programs and Clip Programs and Key Groups. So if you've watched those videos, then this video is a good extension of that, and hopefully some of the techniques and workflows will help you to start putting tracks together in your MPC. Now, a lot of people have asked me to show how I go about doing this. Now, there's no definitive answer or definitive method to this. I don't start trying to make a song or a project in my MPC X from scratch in any particular way. I haven't got a particular method. I don't load up a template. I just go with how I'm feeling and the vibe that I want to create on any given day. So the techniques used in this video, hopefully you can use some of those for yourself in your own productions, but as I just said, it's all really down to you. But hopefully some of the techniques I'll show will give you a bit of an idea of how you can go about doing the same kind of thing. Now, this is aimed at people that have only really just started out on the MPC Live or MPC X, or in fact any other MPC, because in quite a lot of my beginner's guide videos, those techniques do kind of translate to all the legacy MPCs, because essentially the way that things are built up in terms of programs, tracks, sequences and things like that are kind of the same throughout because of the MPC's standard and universal kind of format. So usually, because I like working with breakbeats, I'll go to my breakbeat folder in my content browser. Because the MPC X and the MPC Live differ slightly because of the amount of controls that you have on the MPC X, things like browsing for samples you can do directly from this dedicated button on the MPC X. On the MPC Live, from memory, I think you have to press menu and go to browser. So I'm going to do it that way so I can cater for both users. So menu and then press browser, and now we can see our content directories. So the first option here is places. That's where any USB sticks or hard drives or SD cards you've got connected, or an SSD drive that you might have installed, that's where they show up. Content is the internal content that you get when you first buy this machine. Expansions are any expansion packs that you've loaded. So first of all, I'm going to get a nice couple of breakbeats from my own sample folder. So I'm going to go to my MPCX SD, samples, breaks, classics, and I'm just going to choose a random folder, classic breaks E to K, open that. So I'm going to load this break in, Funky Constellation Street Talk Part 1. So I'm going to load that in, and I'm going to get another break. That's quite nice. Garnet Mims Stop Check Yourself. So I've just loaded those into memory, but I have not selected a pad which they can be loaded onto. If I did want to do that, I just press on a pad, it lights up, then I can load that in. I've already loaded it, and now it says the sample exists. I could just press replace and it will just replace that sample, but now it's assigned to this pad. Okay, so I'm going to go back to that other breakbeat. We can check what it's called by going to sample assign, and then you can see any breaks that you've got loaded into memory. So on my first pad, I've got that Garnet Mims break. And we can choose our second pad and just click on any other samples in this list, and that will assign it to whatever pad you selected. So now I've got those two breaks. Let's now go to Program Editor. On the MPC X, it's a dedicated button over here. Again, I can't actually remember in the MPC Live. I think you might have to go to Menu and Program Edit, which is at the top of the screen there. So I'm going to press the MPC X button and go into my program editor. So this drum program is on track 1. It's the default program that gets automatically created for you when you switch on your MPC Live or MPC X. I've got loads of other videos showing you how to use the tracks and the programs and the sequences, and just check them out. They're all in the MPC Live and MPC X tutorial playlists on my channel. So back to Program Edit. So I'm going to press the second tab along, which is Samples, and now we can see the samples. So this is the sample on our first pad. And I'm going to split it up in the program editor. I could go to the sample editor and create chops, but the reason I don't want to do that is because I don't want to create a chop program. I can quite easily just do it from the program itself. So what I'm going to do is make sure this pad is selected. I'm going to go to copy here. Now you do have a copy button on the MPC Live, but it's down underneath the screen, I believe, by the transport controls. On the MPC X, it's just up here. So we're focusing on the pad that we want to copy from. Then we have to press the screen, and that will allow us to copy that pad to another pad. So I'm going to just copy it to the pad above it and press do it. So now we've got those two samples on both of those pads there, pad 1 and pad 5. Now if I press these together now, they're going to play over the top of each other because the program is automatically set to polyphonic. I could choose monophonic, so then those samples will cut each other off. If it's in polyphonic, they'll play over the top of each other. But I'm going to leave it in polyphonic mode because I do want some sounds to play over the top of other sounds. So the way to get around that is go to LFO modulation, which is the 5th tab along, and choose a mute group for those samples. So I'm going to choose mute group 1 for both of these samples, and now they will choke each other. So on my first pad, I'm going to take out one of the kicks. So I'm just pressing it to audition it on the MPC X. Because I'm in screen control mode for my cue links, I've got all the start points for my samples here. So this one will go right across quite quickly. So that's times 1000. This is times 100. So it goes a little bit less sensitive now. And it goes even less sensitive as you get down to the bottom cue link there. So that means you can do really fine editing. So I'm just going to use my top one here to get to roughly the start of that kick drum. I'm going to scroll in or magnify, and now I'm going to use one of the other cue links, the third one, so I can get that dead on the start of that kick. Now, something I just skipped over is that if you've got slice, which is here, set to all, that means any other samples that are the same as this, which as we know, we've got the same sample on pad 5, the start points will be reflected. So if I choose this pad, it's on that kick, and if I choose the pad above it, and now I move that start point to this snare, we'll go back to the first pad and it's moved that as well. So I don't want that to happen. To stop that, you switch the slice mode to pad for both breaks, and then you can independently set the start and end points for those pads. So let's go and choose the kick again for pad 1. Let's just adjust it up with the cue link again. And now let's adjust the start point for pad 5. And now they're different. So now I've got my 5th pad selected. It doesn't matter what pads you use, it's all down to preference and obviously ergonomics. If you're left or right-handed, you might prefer kicks and snares to be on different pads, or round the other way, vice versa. I'm left-handed. It doesn't really matter for this. I do usually prefer to obviously have my kicks on the left, and then I can tap my snare with the right. If you're right-handed, or if you just like it different anyway, you might prefer to have the kick here so you can trigger the snare with your left hand. But because I've got them, well, one underneath the other, it's kind of irrelevant. The reason I've done that is because on my second pad, I've got this other breakbeat that I want to have a play with. I think I'm going to use the kick from this break on pad 1 and a snare from my second break. Again, I've forgotten to do this. It's a habit that I've got into, is forgetting to change the slice. Now that one's clean, but it's not got an awful lot of space between it and the next hits that come after it, but that's okay. I'm still going to choose it. Now, I've not chosen the same mute group for this snare on this second pad, so I need to do that so I can choke these. So I don't actually like the snare from this original sample on my first pad. So I'm actually going to get rid of this snare that's on pad 5. I'm actually going to copy that to pad 3. And then I'm going to change the start point so we can actually get rid of the sample that's on pad 5 now. And now we've got it on pad 3. So now I've got a kick and a snare there. But I'm actually going to change that to a hi-hat now. I'm just going to choose this one towards the end here. This is a bit of housekeeping that you can do. If you don't want any of the other sounds in these samples, you can flatten the pads. So I'm going to choose the kick, I'm going to press this arrow at the top of the screen and flatten the pad. It's a good thing to remember to take the audio tail down to 0 seconds if you don't want any extra silence added to the end of that sample. You might do in certain situations, but if you just want that isolated section where your start and end points are set to, just set it to 0 seconds. You can rename it there, so let's just do that for a good bit of housekeeping. Let's just put kick 1 and do it. Now that sample, the original sample, is still in memory. If we go to the sample editor, we can still access all those hits. So it's a good thing to just keep them there for now. Get your breakbeat going, and then if you do want any of the samples or the additional sections from the main sample, you can go and get them later. If you don't, you can just press your system resources button up the top right corner and purge your unwanted samples. But I'm not going to do that just yet, just in case I want some of the other sections of that original sample. So let's go back to program edit. So we've flattened the kick. Now I want to flatten the snare because I don't want anything else after it or before it. So flatten that, rename that to snare 1. Do it. And there's our hi-hat. We'll do the same to that. Let's just name that HHT1. Do it. So if we did now purge, we'd have a nice clean selection of drum sounds. We've just got a hi-hat, kick and a snare, none of that other sample data, and we're not using up any additional memory that is just a waste. Right, so there you go, simple stuff. So let's now put in a sequence. Okay, so that's all nicely in time. Now, to make things a bit more interesting, I'm going to copy my first kick drum onto a different pad. So I'm going to put it on pad 4 now. So I've selected pad 1, I'm going to press copy, I'm going to press the screen and select my 4th pad and press do it. And now we've got that kick. So what I'm going to do with this kick is I'm going to roll off some of the top end so it sounds like a ghost kick. Okay, so now we've got a ghost kick. And this is where I'm going to use the swing. So let's go back to the main page. We don't have to go back to the main page to record in. In fact, let's just stay in the program editor. And I'm going to put my sequence into overdub now so I don't overwrite what I've already put in. Doesn't sound too bad, but let's go up to time correction up here. And here's the swing field. Let's change that to 63. That's my preferred swing amount. It seems to be a nice middle ground to give you that swing so you can actually hear it without it being too much or too little so you can't hear it. Now you can choose the events to be selected. So I've just selected the swing for this actual pad, that ghost kick that I've just created there with the filter. I could apply it to all, it wouldn't make any difference because the kick, snare and the hat that I've already put in are on the grid and it won't swing them. It will only swing things that are kind of on the kind of 16ths, if you know what I mean, or just slightly off grid in terms of straight beats. It's probably not the best way to explain it, but I could just choose all events. So I'm going to do that anyway, and you'll hear that the kick, the snare and the hat aren't actually changed. So I'm just going to play back again. This is without the swing. Now I'm going to apply the swing. So it's ever so slightly shifted those ghost kicks just a little bit later, so they sort of give it that kind of jump rather than it just being a bit more kind of, you know, on the grid. So at this point I wouldn't do any heavy processing, but that snare, I think it does need to come up a little bit in terms of the high end. So I'm going to go to Program Edit, go to Effects, make sure I've selected my snare, going to double tap there and choose the full band parametric EQ. So I'm going to select that, press the pencil so I can edit that. So the frequency is set to 5600 or 5600. If we increase the gain on that, the band is quite wide, I find, and it's, you know, not really preferable. I just want to add some really high-end frequencies to that. There you go. So it really brightens the top end of that snare up. Now I don't really like the sort of the hiss that's at the end of that snare, so I'm going to go back to Program Editor. I'm going to go to my filter envelope page. I'm going to choose the amp envelope to be an attack, hold, decay, sustain mode, and then I'm going to bring the sustain all the way down so we can hardly hear it, or not at all, and then I'm just going to increase the decay. I could increase the hold, but the decay will give us a nice slope. Okay, so I'm going to focus on decay, and I'm just going to use my data wheel to bring that out. It's lost a little bit of volume now because it's a shorter, snappier sample. So I like to use the compressor for this, the compressor master usually, because it's got a dedicated gain control. You don't add any compression, it's just got output down here that you can increase the volume of your samples. And it saves you going to the sample editor or bouncing out the quiet sample, going to the sample editor, normalizing. I just add it from here, and then if I like the sound of it, I can just flatten it, and it will be flattened along with any effects that I've added to it. Now let's say I want to add a bit of low end to the kick drum, make it a bit more boomy. So this is a good technique. Let's go select the kick. As we can see, we've not got any effects on there. In fact, I'm just going to go back to the snare. And as you can see, we still get access even from the insert effects page, the option to flatten. So I'm going to flatten that now. This is also a good housekeeping method to save memory, or actually CPU, should I say, because it uses up some of the processing power the more effects you use. So if you're happy with the way that a sample sounds, with the effects that you've applied to it, I'm happy with that snare, I would just press do it now, and as you can see, it's now got rid of the compressor and the parametric EQ, it's got rid of them out of the inserts. I'm starting from afresh now, but I've now got those effects onto that sample. And that's just a nice little bit of housekeeping you can do on the way to keep in mind so you save CPU. So now let's deal with this kick. Now I'm going to go to the filter envelope page. The default filter is set to low 2, But if we change the type to high 4, that's quite a decent one. Now the cutoff is up full, so we're hardly going to hear this kick now. It's just going to be very high frequency. I usually bring it down to around 25, 30. 24 actually sounds a bit better. And then I increase the resonance, and that will make it more self-resonating, and it'll actually emphasize the low frequencies even though it's a high pass filter. So now we can hear that's got quite a nice bit of heaviness and weight to it. And now I'd go back to the cutoff and adjust the frequency so it actually finds the resonant frequency of this actual kick drum. Now this does depend on the pitch of it. So if I was to move my frequency down now, so around 18 or 20, it's at its most loudest. So that's where we've actually found the resonant frequency of that actual kick drum. Now that will change if we change the pitch of that kick drum. So now I've pitched it down to -4 semitones. Let's go back to the filter. Now that frequency value that's 18 now isn't taking as much effect. I'd have to lower it now for it to find the resonant frequency of the kick drum based on its current pitch setting now. And now you can really hear a big thud to it. Now we're getting a little bit of a click I can hear on the end of that, so I'm going to adjust the sample. Now I'm not going to do that in here, I'm going to go to the sample editor. So whatever pad you've pressed, if you now press sample edit, so I want to choose the kick, it will focus on that in the sample editor. Now that click isn't as apparent because when you're in the sample editor it plays it back at its root pitch or its root note. So I'm going to select the last half of it, press process, and then choose fade out as my function, and that will just fade down the end of that sample there. And now let's go back to program editor, and now we shouldn't hear that sort of click or noise at the end. Now it's gone. Now one thing I didn't do is change the pitch of our ghost kick, so I want to pitch that down to -4 semitones so it matches the main kick. Now another thing we can do is deal with the hi-hat. Now because there's no low frequency content in there that we need, we can change the filter type of that to a high pass. So I'm just going to choose high 4. And that way we get more of a cleaner signal throughout because there's no frequencies that might interfere with any of the lower drum hit frequencies that we've got, like the snare or the kick. Another thing you can do, because we can see that this hi-hat is quite low in volume, we can go to the sample editor. It's focused on that now. Press process, and we can normalize it, which will bring it up to its highest volume level before it starts clipping in the digital domain. So now that's really loud and it's not going to sound in context with our other drum hit. So I'm going to go back to the program editor. I'm going to press the samples page once, and now we get access to the individual volume for that actual layer where our hi-hat is loaded onto. So I'm just going to bring that down to quite low, press the sequence back. That's not too bad. Now you could choose to keep the tail of that hi-hat in there because it's giving us quite a nice old school vinyl kind of feel to it. But we could also shorten that sample. We could either shorten it with the start and end points, but that's going to sound a bit scrappy. So let's have a listen to that. I'd rather use the amplitude envelope to do that. Sounds too choppy to me, it doesn't sound natural. So let's go to the filter envelope page. I'm going to choose attack, hold, decay, sustain for the amp envelope mode. And again, I'm going to just bring down the sustain field here. Now it's really snappy and chops off. I'm going to increase the decay again. Another thing that I like to do to create a bit of variation or a bit more of an interesting beat is to let's go back to the program editor, go back to sample so we can see our hi-hat. Now I'm going to copy that to pad 7, the pad above it, just so I know that, you know, in my column that I've got a similar sound. It's just something that helps you to kind of visually know where you're at. So we're focused on pad 3, sorry. I'm going to press the box on the screen and copy it to pad 7. Do it. So I'm going to take the volume down for this hi-hat on pad 7. It's the same sample, but I'm just going to adjust the actual volume of this different pad. So now we've got something that we can play around in terms of the hi-hats. So let's just play the sequence back and use note repeat to add some variation with that other hi-hat. Because we've got a swing set on, it's automatically swinging our note repeats. So if we now take that swing down to 50 and press and hold our note repeat, you can see that that swing is not applied. But if we increase the swing, we can actually live audition that swing. Okay? But we want it to be set to a swing value of 63 to correspond with the rest of the beat, which is swung, as you know, with our kick here. It will just sound wrong if we've got those straight 16ths going over the top of these swung ghost kicks. So I'm now going to put those in. Now let's just go back to the program editor. This is where you wouldn't want this to be set to a mute group. Okay, so the hi-hats aren't set to a mute group, or at least the same mute group as the kick, the snare and the ghost kick, because they're playing at 16ths over the top of these other elements, the kick and the snare, which are playing on the 8th beats, if you see what I mean. Okay, so we don't want those to interfere or cut the other sounds off. So let's put those in. Now I'm going to add some 30-second notes to those hi-hats just at the end of these 2 bars. So I don't really like the volume level of those, but we can just go into the step sequencer. If we press and hold shift, we can choose whatever pad we want to edit. Okay, so now I'm looking at those 16th swung hi-hats that I put on pad 7. The time division we're looking at is 30-second notes, and we know that we added those 30 seconds. So because we've got a gap in between, we know these are 16ths in the first bar and for the most of the second bar. But in the second bar, we're still seeing the 16th notes. That's because we haven't used the arrows here to jump up to see what the steps 17 to 32 are doing. So they don't look brilliant. I'm going to actually add 4 there at the end. Okay, and I'm going to just sweep up the volume there. And I'm just going to make them all slightly lower than the main ones. Okay, so let's go right from the bottom up and create a nice curve. So let's listen to that. And again, we could have also just put all these hi-hats in just using pad 3. So let's press, let's press and hold shift. So we can see that our pad 3 hi-hats are on 8th notes, okay? We could have just put notes in between there on the 16ths and then taken the volumes down of those and done exactly the same thing as I'd done with the note repeats. So that's another way that you can enter those notes to give it that kind of shuffle feel along with the swing value that I've added. But anyway, that's our beat. Now, I love sub bass and I love subtle sub bass, you know, just 1 or 2 hits here and there to give a beat a nice bit of weight. So let's go and grab a sub bass kick drum or something like that. So let's go to browse. I'm going to go to my internal drive. In fact, I'm going to go to expansions because I know that there's a hell of a lot of decent sub bass samples within these expansions. We've got our sub bass in there. Instead of live recording this, let's just show you the step sequencer. So I'm going to change my time division to 16ths. Then I know that I'm going to put my sub on my first beat and on my 11th beat, and that should correspond with the main kicks. So I think I'm going to put another sub kick or another sub hit on the second bar. So let's go back to the step sequencer, but I'm not going to put it on the downbeat. I think I'm just going to put it somewhere in the middle of the second bar. So I'm going to put it on that kick that comes in on step 7, I think. So let's put that there. But I'm going to pitch that down now. So I could just remove this from the step sequencer and play it in live and use 16 levels. So let's just do that first, and then I'll show you another method of doing that. So let's go back to the main page. So I'm going to go to 16 levels, make sure I've selected that sub. So the default pitch we can hear by pressing pad 4. If you see here it says original pad, it says 4, and that tells us that in 16 level mode, pad 4 will play back the original pitch of this sample which we've already got programmed into our sequence. If we press pad 5, where the actual sample is, that it will be pitched up 1 semitone. The very first pad is not low enough for what I want. I want a really low one. So we can change the original pad number to a higher value. And that means we're shifting up the original pad semitones or the tuning to a higher pad. So let's shift it all the way up to pad 16. And that means we can work our way back down and choose a very low pitch sub. So I quite like that one there. So let's program that in. So I'm happy with that. That's the drum and the bass sorted. Now let's add some musical elements. So let's go to main. Now if I'm stuck for a sample and I think that I probably haven't got something on my hard drive, I usually go to YouTube, and it's exactly the reason why I called myself Tubedigga in the first place. So I'm just going to move my camera up so you can see YouTube on my screen. And let's just change focus a bit. There you go. So I like to sample from psych jazz and psychedelia. There's an awful lot of interesting sounds from that era, or that era should I say, from like 1960s through to the 1970s. I usually just type in psych jazz, P-S-Y-C-H-E jazz, or psychedelic rock or something like that, and YouTube's an absolute treasure trove for that kind of material. I'm going to choose pad 9 because we don't have any drums going from pad 9 up to pad 16, and that's where I'm going to add my musical samples, so they're kind of separate from my bass and my drum hits down the bottom here. So it just happened that pad 9 had been pitched down 2 semitones, or -2 semitones, and it just works. It was just a complete fluke, complete coincidence, and I quite like the timing of it, so I'm just going to put it in as it is now. Now that's all fair and good. Again, I've forgotten to change my slice mode to pad, so let's change that. I'm going to copy that pad to pad 10, so click on the screen, choose pad 10, do it. So I'm going to erase that first instance of it, and I'm going to choose pad 10 and see how that sounds over the top. So this is how I would then start to think about a second sequence, or maybe use this as the first sequence. So I'm just going to choose that. I don't want this big hit here because it's going to clash. So I'm just going to make sure that's like that. I'm going to flatten that. So we've just got that section there. And I'm going to do the same with this pad. Okay, so before I flatten that, I'm going to copy that again to pad 11. So copy, select pad 11, do it. Now I'm going to flatten pad 9. And I'm also going to choose another section from pad 11 and flatten that. Flatten that. And now I'm going to choose mute group 2 because we've already used mute group 1 for the drums, and these will cut each other off. Okay, so that should be enough. So I'm going to treat this as my first sequence, and I'm going to use the section that I put on pad 11 for this. So I'm going to make sure that I'm not using any of those. I'm going to raise these in this sequence. And let's add this to our drum and our bass. So now I'm going to go to the main page, go to sequence edit, which is this pencil here. And I'm going to copy that sequence to sequence 2, do it. And I'm also going to copy it to sequence 3. So now we've got 3 identical sequences. I'm going to go back to sequence 2. I'm going to erase that pad 11 that we put in. And on sequence 2, I'm going to use the sample or the section of that sample that's on pad 9. So now we can just go to next sequence and choose between our first 2 sequences. So let's see what our first sequence sounds like, and then we'll jump straight into the second sequence. So we've created some variation there. So we've built a drum pattern, we've sampled in some musical elements, we've done quite a bit of editing in the program editor, and now we're at the stage where we can start changing up the sequence and hopefully inspire ourselves to make the track even more elaborate, even though it's, you know, very basic in the grand scheme of things. Let's now choose our third sequence, and choose that sample on pad 10, which we haven't used. So now we would have to erase pad 11 because that was the original one we copied over. So we don't want that sample playing on there. And now we're going to input the sample section that's on pad 10. So as you can hear, it cuts off. So that means that we can either restart that sample, but that might make it a bit repetitive, even though it's kind of repetitive anyway. But we can use one of these other two pads, or we can create a fourth pad with another section and have a little change up. But let's try and work with what we've already got. So let's put that in again. Let's just erase that. And let's chop between the other two pads along with that, or at least one of them. Okay, so that works. Let's actually erase those again. And then we can just try pad 10 with pad 9 instead of pad 10 and pad 11. So they both work. So we could actually keep sequence 3 now, go to sequence edit, copy sequence to sequence 4, do it, erase those notes again, so we know that we're clear, and then do that other change up with pad 10 and pad 11. So now we've got 4 sequences. So let's go back to next sequence. In fact, I'm going to go to the song edit. So on the MPC-X, you press and hold Shift and press next sequence, and that will take you to the song editor. Now we're in the song editor, and we can see those 4 sequences that we've got to work with. Let's insert the slots. So we've got 4 slots now. Now in here, we can choose the amount of times that they repeat. So even though they're 2 bars long, we can choose them to repeat for, let's do 4. So these 2 bar sequences are now going to repeat for 4 times. So essentially they're going to be 8 bars long. We could increase the length of the sequences to 8 bars and then do some more variation in between them. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to make all these sequences 4 bars, or loop over 4 times, so they're essentially 8 bars long. And then we have to change the actual number of the sequence. So our first slot needs to be 1, second slot needs to be 2, third slot needs to be 3, fourth slot is already sequence 4. And we can just play start, and that will play back all our 4 sequences in order. let's just summarize what we've done. We've brought in two completely different breakbeats, taken elements from them, the kick from one, another kick from the same one, a snare and a hi-hat from the other, and created a hybrid beat that sounds correct in itself, as if it's our own original breakbeat that we've created. I say we, I've done all the work, you've just been sat there eating donuts, and I've been doing all the work. But that's all right, I still love you. So we've put that together, we've added some sub bass, we've had some fluky moments, so it's kind of easy for me to put something together kind of live on camera. I have had quite a few mistakes and a few little things go wrong in this video. I'm using my iPhone to record this, so whenever I get a notification on Gmail or a text message, it actually comes on the screen and what I'm recording into QuickTime gets recorded. So anything like that, I have to stop and start. I also had a very good mate of mine call me. I had to stop the video then because it automatically cuts the video off in QuickTime when the phone, you know, you can't have the phone recording and speak on it at the same time and record video. So loads of things have gone wrong, but I've managed to put together quite a nice sequence, and that musical sample that I took from YouTube just happened to work very well, and it's got the right kind of vibe that I like. You know, you've got the quite nice raw sound of the beat and the sub bass, and then you have this nice light contrasting flute on top, you know, with a nice sort of acoustic guitar. It's not the be all and end all of how you put a track together, but if you do make particularly boom bap hip hop or nice instrumental hip hop beats, you know, it doesn't matter if you do that or you make house or techno or drum and bass. It's essentially the same thing. You just get a vibe, you put your breaks together, make them sound original if you don't really want to use stock sounds or expansion pack sounds. If you have got any comments or questions, please put them down below and I will no doubt get to those questions and answer them as soon as I can. Again, if you do want one-on-one tuition with myself, you can hit me up on Facebook. It's www.facebook.com/Tubedigga. Simple enough. Just send me a message on there and we can arrange a Skype or Google Hangout session, whatever you prefer to use. They are $63 for you guys in the States and Canada. They're 45 UK pounds, or they're around 52 euros, I believe the conversion is, for an hour. Everyone that I've taught on these lessons has said, this has been brilliant, you've answered all my questions, excellent, and they've recommended me either on Facebook MPC groups or elsewhere. Also, if you don't want to do that and you just want to contribute to my channel, there's links in the description to my PayPal where you can send me any amount of your choice just to help support me and my channel. This would make a massive difference to me if you could contribute to the channel somehow so I can keep giving you this free content on YouTube. So I'm not going to go on about that anymore. If you want to support me, I would really appreciate it. And I will see you on the next one. This is Tubedigga. I'm out.